I'm rejected like 9 times out of 10, maybe more. So a number of those people that rejected me, 30-40% of them eventually became customers 5 years' time. Don't worry about rejection and move on. And then Allah opens a path, right?
Like the Jewish community, they'll spend double the price if they need to, as long as it's within their ecosystem.
Muslims still spending money at Starbucks, they're still buying Coca-Cola, they're not caring about what's happening, they're still buying these brands. Just imagine there was a multi-billion pound Waqf. It serves a social need. Let's start faith-based care homes. We create wealth in a righteous way. It's imbued with barakah. It means your dua is accepted. I think the Muslim pound could also get stronger through those 3 kind of dimensions.
Assalamu alaikum, Sultan. How are you?
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Very well, thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast at last after all your travels.
Yeah, yeah, mashallah. I mean, London's a place I do come to frequently, but it's a busy schedule. So I've been doing some international travels, as you say.
Of course. Right. So we have about 4 million Muslims in the UK, and that means billions of pounds in spending power. But most of that seems to leave the community straight away. Why is it leaving, and where should that money be going?
Yeah, so I think it's a very interesting question. How do we build that, virtuous cycle? You know, making the Muslims cyclically and systemically support each other within our own ecosystem. And it's something I've pondered on really in many levels, because you've got to look at one level, spending habits. And if you look at essential spending, that's largely not necessarily the Muslim economy. It's just your local economy, and it's linked to neighborhoods, right? And actually, at one level, there's nothing wrong with that, because the neighborhood, however you define it, you know, it could be the kind of Islamic context of your neighbors, you know, where neighbors have rights upon you. You can extend it to your locality, your city. And, you know, Sheikh Sahel at NZF talks about your city as an entity, the concept of Medina as well as a template for a city. So at one level, localized spending, so, you know, your accommodation, your shopping, your transport, by definition is localized. And to the extent that you live in a high density Muslim area, then it should benefit your locality and thereby benefit Muslims. And there is some secularity. I think it's then looking at that trade-off between global and local. So if you go into a local high street, it's full of the same old brands, right? And it's not necessarily your local independent and you're helping your neighbor, because you're actually helping some global corporate. At the same time, they would argue that they're employing local people. So it's not as clear cut as some people would have us believe, that, you know, global corporates are, you know, kind of some inherent evil, and, you know, we should be using, you know, just locals. So it's just not black and white for people. So when you kind of look at the Muslim pound and, you know, the value of it, at one level, localization, it's fine, that whether it's Muslim or otherwise. At another level, we've got to think, actually, how are we spending it? So when we have a decision to make, consumer choice or businessman's choice, how do we select how we consume or how we invest? And do we pick an option purely on price? Or do we bring this concept of value? And this is where the subjectivity, the normative analysis kicks in, right? What constitutes value for a Muslim? It's not just, okay, it's the best bang for buck. So we all know that cheapest isn't always best. There are false economies. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what constitutes value to society and Muslim society. And I think then if you start overlaying that as a kind of lens upon your spending, you might then say, yeah, it might be a bit cheaper going to global corporate, but actually going to our local businessman who's on, I don't know, supporting the Masjid or helping fund the Muslim scouts or whatever it is, right? actually, even though it might be a bit more expensive, there is a derived value to where I live. And then I think beyond that, we can talk about a strategic level of thinking. And, I've spoken for a little while, so I'm going to hand back to you to explore it with me a little bit more.
So basically what you're saying is a lot of the times, rather than just looking at what the immediate benefit is, in terms of I've bought this drink and that's going to the shopkeeper and it's the cheapest because buying this drink from this shop is cheaper than anywhere else, compared to I bought this drink from a local businessman shop who also helps in the masjid or who also runs the Muslim Scout. So we need to look beyond that initial transaction. Is that what you're trying to say?
I'll give you an example from the industry I'm in. So, obviously I run Offer, a home finance provider in the UK. And people often ask me, your products appear to be more expensive than conventional mortgages, even though we do home purchase plans, right? Or buy-to-let finance, whatever it is. And so they kind of compare us straight away to conventional. And there's a whole host of reasons for why we're not the same price. We're very competitive, actually, within our sector, and we're not excessively expensive. But at the same time, we're not the cheapest in the market. Yet many Muslims will come to me and say, your products and products of your competitors, well, other Islamic players, I'm not speaking just for Offer here, appear to be more expensive. And that's a real issue. It's a real deterrent. And at one level, it's apples versus pears, right? I'm selling something that is Sharia compliant. I'm employing lots of Muslims. I'm helping a lot of Muslims. And it's a little bit more expensive. Why? I'm not actually making more money from you. If anything, I'm making less money from you. My margins, if you look at our accounts, and if you're trained in accounting, we'll say, actually, the margins these Islamic finance players are making are far lower. They're not exploiting you. Their inherent costs are higher. Right? A, they're smaller, so there's economies of scale. But B, their the cost of funds are higher because we're not able to get cheap funds. Like I don't know, a conventional bank has got lots of current accounts, has got lots of low funds. So again, I think sometimes people look at the situation, just like the example you gave. They look at the situation and then they say, well, it's more beneficial for me to take the cheapest option instead of thinking of a larger ecosystem. Actually, if I support Islamic finance players, they will get bigger and over time things will get cheaper and maybe my children, my grandchildren are going to benefit. We don't have that long-termism. There's an immediacy. It's not just common to the Muslims. It's actually become very common in society, this immediacy issue. Delayed gratification and long-term thinking is not prevalent anymore. We know that. So I think we have to tackle that as providers of Islamic products. We have to tackle it as community leaders as well. That attention spans are short. Immediacy is a problem. How are we going to tackle that? I have to accept. I have to accept that. Whilst I have this view that people should be looking at the ecosystem, thinking long term, looking at the overall value, but the reality is I'm dealing with people who are looking at things much more short term. So I've got to find a way in, and that's what our challenge is as providers of Islamic products. People who support this concept of that virtuous cycle of Islamic spending and consumption.
So right now you're leading Offer, but in the mid-2000s, you were helping with Al Rayan Bank. And again, we had the same situations when the Islamic Bank of Britain first started, where people were saying, well, this is just more a repackaged interest model and it's just more expensive than the conventional banks. So is that something that has anything changed or since then? Or is that something that you feel is still there where people are just basically just saying, look, the product's just too expensive?
Well, look, it's going to be an ongoing education and awareness battle, if you like. Clearly, when Islamic Bank of Britain came out, it was the first to market. The challenges were much bigger than they are now. because people weren't aware of Islamic finance. They didn't understand how fighting riba or avoiding riba manifested itself technically in products. And thirdly, a new bank, the concept of a new bank when it launched was very difficult, because one bank had just fallen foul of collapsed BCCI as well. So it was a tough gig. So whatever people say now about the challenges, trust me, it was more challenging then. And actually, in terms of people say the proof's in the pudding. I say the proof's in the balance sheets. Billions and billions and billions of pounds of Islamic finance transactions have occurred in the UK since Islamic Bank of Britain has launched. You're probably north for 10 billion, right? If not more. And so it takes time, right? You got to look, you're starting from a standing start, as they say, from zero, and 20 years on. Yeah, okay, 10 billion, it's a small amount, or if it's 5 billion or 10 billion, it's all kind of small in relation to the total value, right, that is out there. I understand that. And that ongoing battle has to continue. But what I'm seeing is, in terms of the next generation, they're much more switched on to finding products that are aligned to their faith. They're much more inquisitive. And so while there's more players than there were back then, yet the market's still expanding. There's enough for Offer and Stride Up and FIDA and the banks. Everybody seems to be doing reasonably well. So I don't think the market's the issue. You're always going to get skeptics. You're always going to get people who will try and rationalize why I should go for something cheaper, even though it's interest-based, right? And that's a constant argument. And hopefully some of these discussions that we have will encourage people to think a bit more deeply about the issues we face.
So you were mentioning earlier about people not necessarily spending within the Muslim ecosystem. Do you think that's something more to do with mindset? Because other communities, like the Jewish community, they actually spend within their ecosystem very well. They'll spend double the price if they need to, as long as it's within their ecosystem. But we do the opposite. We'll be like, well, I can get it 20 quid here. Why am I going to spend 40 quid here?
Yes, and I think again, I think we just touched on it a little bit. This prioritization of price over this bigger picture of supporting your own, right? And I kind of think about that. And first of all, Muslims aren't one homogenous group, right? And unity is an issue, right? You got to put those two things into context. So if you take it one layer down, I remember we used to look at market segments, and you could say there's Muslims, but I remember doing presentations on this in 2005 and 2006, that you can't just look at, it's just the Muslim sector. I'd love to think it was. The unity principle would say it's just a Muslim sector. But actually, within the Muslim sector, you've got different social strata, from self-employed, unemployed, all the way up to very wealthy, middle class and wealthy. And then you've got the kind of geographical origins, particularly back in 2004 and 5. We're in this kind of third, fourth generation where the motherland is less relevant, and it's there's a concept of British Islam and being a British Muslim, and obviously intermarriage between ethnic backgrounds. It became much more prevalent, right? So I think now the timing is a bit more ripe to kind of make that argument around the Muslim pound, as you say, the unity of goals, even if you bifurcate around choice, the unity of goals, we have to establish that unity of purpose and goals. And then once you've established that, I think it's much easier to make that argument around, actually, your consumer decision is around, first and foremost, does it fulfill my need? But at the same time, if it's a choice between one and the other, is it benefiting my society? But you're and this is the challenge, right? you're fighting these waves of a consumerism, brand, social media, kind of causing immediacy. What's in your face is what gets done. And I'm not sure what the solution is to reframe people's mindsets to a long-term outlook. I think that's really needed.
How difficult is that though?
So I think we have to go back to this, the examples in the, in the Sirah and the Sunnah, and we know that what we have to do is plant the seeds, do good works, tie a camel, as it were, as well, prepare, do what we can, and then the outcomes, leave it to Allah. But doesn't mean that we should be, and that's the complete opposite of being passive and just saying, Allah will look after us, right? And we just got to be very clear about that. So I think we should have a long-term frame of mind, Islamically. Yeah, of course we want quick wins, and we want to. We're human. We're insan. We have to have some wins to motivate us. So iman varies, motivation varies, but we have to consider the fact that we are dropping seeds. And right at the outset, let me give you that example. When you mentioned Islamic Bank of Britain, I think new bank, new products, pounding the streets of Northern England, Middle England, Midlands, London. I think rejection was the norm. However skeptical people think the situation is today, it was far worse. I mean, I would go down the high street. I got very little marketing budget. I'd knock on all the doors of the Muslim businesses and say, "Hi, I'm from a newly formed Islamic bank. What's an Islamic bank? Yeah, it's products without riba." I'm rejected like 9 times out of 10, maybe more. So you have to be, first of all, build some emotional resilience. But you have to be optimistic about what we're doing. You can't say, actually, we don't seem to be making much headway today. Muslims are still spending money at Starbucks. They're still buying Coca-Cola. They're not caring about what's happening in the Ummah, and they're still buying these brands. And do we need to be down about it? No, I think it's just you carry on doing what you have to do, and plant those seeds, and some of them will come to fruition. So a number of those people that rejected me back in 2004, 2005, and I literally trod those streets, knocked on those doors, talked to people I've never met before. Many of them, many of them, maybe 30, 40% of them eventually became customers 5 years' time. There's a salutary lesson there that you have to do the right thing. You have to carry on, spreading the message, if you want to call it that. And don't worry about rejection. Move on, and then Allah opens a path, right?
So, what do you think a fully functioning Muslim ecosystem looks like? From if you were to paint the full picture, from institutions to behaviors to banks, what does a fully working ecosystem look like?
Yeah, so I think we have to be careful, right? We have to understand that we're in a Muslim minority country. So our ecosystem should not be isolationist and otherly, at the risk of us being seen as not part of society, right?
Yeah.
It's not integration is it's not about integration, but it's about interaction. That we should always continue to interact. Integration to the extent that this is our our lawful sovereign state. We accept that, and we are allowed to practice our deen here. So there are obligations on us as citizens to be law abiding and to conform, within the rules and laws of the state. Right? I'd make no bones about that. We should be doing that. So the ecosystem is something that exists in a Muslim minority setting. You have to make that distinction very clearly. So if you say we should start bartering and using gold dinars, which many people have said, I don't think that is a legitimate objective of a Muslim minority practicing their faith in a non-Muslim majority country. That just can't be true, right? It's different if people are saying you can't practice your faith. Then we have different decisions to make. So I think what it is you're seeing already some of the benefits naturally of people spending within the Muslim ecosystem. When I was young, you didn't eat halal food outside the home, right? You ate at home. You don't today. You go to Parliament, there are halal options, right? So it's like it's amazing, right? The difference around that was just picking one thing: food, the ability to pray, masajid. I worked at a Big Four firm. There was no prayer facility. You go to a Big Four firm in the city today, you can pray. So the ecosystem. I know you're asking me to paint a picture of the end point, which I think we can get there, but we should remember the journey to whatever that end point looks like is happening. It's a dynamic situation, and dynamism is not always positive. Sometimes we're going to get knockbacks. We had all this debate around the Barakah ban, etc. recently. So we have to understand what dynamism means. It's not always flowing in the right direction. There will be setbacks, but the overall drift has been very positive, and a lot of it's down to our forefathers who've set up the institution of a masjid. Our job then is how do we build upon the institution of the masjid to make it something much more central to the community, and how the masjid and for instance what we do at the National Zakat Foundation, how they come together, and we can talk about that a bit later. But let's talk about the Muslim ecosystem. You've got the real economy, you've got the financial economy. Yeah, they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So the real economy is there. Muslims are 3 times more likely to be entrepreneurs and business people. I think we've seen that in places like London, there's 1 million Muslims. We've seen that all over the country, in the Northwest, in Birmingham, Midlands, whatever. You've seen there's a higher propensity to be self-employed, and therefore there is a higher opportunity to break through what I call small business to become bigger businesses. So increasingly you are seeing successful Muslim businesses. I'm not saying Islamic, I'm saying Muslim businesses, right?
Yeah. Like the chaiwalas.
Yeah, whether it's chaiwala or real estate, the Chokadira's owned by the Aziz family, and whatever it is, right? There is, we saw Asda being bought by Muslims. So you are seeing wealth creation, and ultimately, I don't think wealth creation will be the problem. We're entrepreneurial people to a large extent. Immigrants often are. I'm not saying it's down to being Muslim. I'm saying it's a kind of generational observed societal trend. So I think you're getting real economy growth, and I think we need to encourage it. But as at the same time, growth without growth via the wrong means does not imbue barakah in that growth. So what I mean by that is, if you done everything on interest-based basis, you funded everything on the basis of interest. You did it by, I don't know, doing cheap labor and trampling on the rights of people, right? If you created your wealth that way, it's not imbued with barakah, and we know that ultimately it's doomed to failure, right? Whether this life or next life. So this is where the financial economy kicks in. We know that if you were to just purely do everything on the basis of cash, as it were, it would be slow and we would be at a disadvantage. Why? People say, oh, it's a debt-based economy and all this sort of stuff. Actually, the fact that we have tax and debt allows you to have what's called a tax shield, means that you're almost encouraged to have debt because it gives you a tax benefit. And so even you'll find that some of the richest people, they don't need to take out debt. They still take out debt because it actually enhances their yield. So, we're a non-Muslim country. We're in a country with lots of taxes. We have to recognize that. So building the Muslim financial ecosystem is just as important to supply the fuel of growth in the real economy. So what that looks like is We need Islamic banks that do full service offerings in Sharia compliant ways that we don't have today. So, like SME finance, trade finance, helping Muslims export. So I think they'd be very good at that.
Even just
in a Sharia compliant
business
way.
bank accounts.
Business bank accounts. That's what I mean by the SME, kind of helping small businesses. How do we construct products that allow us to fund their capex? Where they do not just the building. We're very good at real estate, right? Still got to go a bit more. But what if the individual wants to buy a machine, to double his production? Quite hard to do Islamically here, even though like leasing inherently should be quite easy to do. So, mashallah, I think many industry practitioners have got together. There are various groups where we're working to, for example, change things like the Consumer Credit Act to allow more Islamic products so that we can do leasing, et cetera, takaful as opposed to insurance. There's a whole host of pieces to be done. But we do need scale, and the Muslim pound to be virtuous cyclically, as I mentioned. People have to kind of almost support their investments into the Muslim sector. Let's take pensions. I'm sure some of your previous speakers may have spoken about this, but look at where the majority of Muslim pensions are. They're all with the HSBC Global Tracker. Not saying that's a bad thing. At least there's a Sharia compliant option there. But where does that money go? It's invested in Apple and Microsoft and Google, because it's largely tech stocks. That's not supporting our local communities. That's not necessarily supporting Muslims. Some of those entities we know are, helping companies in the war sector, as we know, without getting too much into that. And so it's like, well, that's where my pension money has gone, and it's significant. You just look at the balance sheet of HSBC Global Index Tracker from just the UK alone. So we again, as an industry, small efforts, planting seeds, are trying to say to government, let's and encourage other private sector offerings which are more directed at UK stocks and shares or UK enterprise, local government pension schemes. People who work in local government, look at boroughs in London, look at places like Birmingham. They have huge amount, thousands and thousands of Muslim employees. Yeah, where does their pension money go? It's a big deduction. Goes out to a fund, straight off to these other funds. Where does it go back to support Muslim entrepreneurs, local businesses? So there's a lot of work just in the financial side because the wealth's there. Just imagine the £10 billion that might be at HSBC Global Tracker, it's all gone to US stocks. If even a billion of it was directed to support Muslim entrepreneurs build bigger businesses, that the real economy then is linking into the financial economy, into your pension. Some of that money was helping to finance people like Offer to do more finance for you. Again, it's working. So I'm just making a high level picture, because we could go into every sector. We could talk about health. We could talk about this and try and picture the future.
So do you think a lot of funding should go in nurturing Muslim founders, especially the younger one, Gen Zs, who have this ethical mindset, rather than back in the day when they used to push people in become a doctor, accountant, lawyer? Do you think a lot of it should now go towards building something which is ethical, and maybe building a pension fund and other products, not just financial, outside the financial market as well?
So how do we take the good aspects of I guess hustle culture and the good aspects, but I think it can overwhelm our spiritual aspects. But let's take the good aspects of that and say, well, how can we support people? First, it's a two-way street, and what I mean by that is money alone is not enough. Money without values, money without, let's call it mentorship, money without supporting these people, it should be backed up with a big picture or a spiritual dimension. So I think it's not unconditional. The money needs to. I think if we could tap some of this pension wealth, or set up more funds that directly support these businesses, but they also assess those businesses. That those Gen Zs who are setting them up either have a high ceiling for potential, not just in a business sense, that their character can also be developed, and that they've got the baseline for good character. So that's what I mean by conditionality. It's not just doing what the conventional sector might do. Oh, here's a fund. It's like an early stage venture capital fund. Let's go and find Gen Z hustlers, and help them make money, and we'll make money. Right? It cannot be so superficial.
Yeah.
It's got to be imbued with mentorship, and a values, and for us, obviously, an Islamic values-based philosophy.
So, when it comes to building these ethical or Islamic value businesses, you have people like yourself who can provide that mentorship. You have people, for example, Ibrahim Khan and Kuray, Umar Sulaiman and Wahid. This is just a very small fraction of the financial service industry. So, do you think it is possible to then have experts or mentors like yourself guiding the younger generation towards the right direction?
Absolutely. There will be a bandwidth issue. So we've got to use modern tools and techniques, right? So first of all, I think other than just what I call educational, YouTube, social media videos, that's all very motivational. But people need practical frameworks. There'll be a capacity constraint on all the people you just mentioned in terms of mentoring.
Yeah.
So they can do a video, they can outline stuff. How do we systemize it in such a way that we can scale it such that any Gen Z entrepreneur can avail themselves of a framework that underpins their business? So what we need to be doing through an umbrella organization, and there are a few out there that could potentially do it, like such as River Free Foundation, for example, where we supply a framework for any budding entrepreneur, which is, I think people like Mufti Faraz, for example, talk about Sharia-powered framework. And that's far more all-encompassing than what people call ESG, environmental, social, and governance frameworks, because it embodies the Sunnah and the Sharia. So if you take a framework like that, and hopefully I'll be working with Mufti Saab on trying to convert his fantastic concept, his conceptual framework right now, into a practical framework, and then making it available to anybody who wants to base their business on a Sharia-powered basis, right? So I think it's got to be systemic, and then we should then try and create a pool of mentors far beyond just the 3 or 4 people you're talking about. There's so much talent out there. There's so many people have done it. Those people will benefit themselves from a framework, but their expertise can then be also disseminated to those up-and-coming entrepreneurs. Look, I think we've just explained we need Muslims to do well. It's one of the guiding lights behind Offer, for example. We're not, for example, like a typical bridger that's set up. Traditionally, bridgers would be saying, all right, we've funded this company, the value of the property is higher, let's forget the rest. If a guy defaults, we'll take the property, the guy goes down. No interest in that. What's our motivation? We want Muslims to get wealthier. That's at one level. Or Muslim property investors to build their wealth, because they're more likely to give zakah. They're more likely to give sadaqah, right? So, by having a Sharia compliant product, and so people say, "Oh, what's your objective?" It's not about selling products, and then it's going on a journey with the property investor, so that they over time become wealthier. So I've got examples of customers who joined me when I was running the bank, and they had and they might have had a large portfolio. They might have had 10 properties or 5 properties or 10 million. Today they're at 90 million. and over 10 years have gone on a journey and they create more wealth. And these are sort of people who have foregone cheaper finance. So there's people who are more likely to pay their zakah.
Yeah.
Right? And ideally, then we can move on to this concept of local zakah and what NZF does. But yeah.
So do you think, obviously in the financial sector, it's a bit easier to be Sharia compliant, but do you think in other sectors we should have more Sharia compliant businesses? Not just like, for example, having an HMC stamp as the food industry does, but you've got so many other sectors as well, which, for example, a printing business or IT business, but there has to be a framework, a Sharia compliant framework that people follow to have that barakah and to have them Islamic values. So do you think like a HMC style Sharia compliant stamp would do good, or is that something that would be detrimental?
Yeah, so the stamp, a standard, what does a stamp reflect? It's a standard. It's at what point you set the bar. Where does that standard sit today versus what you have? And it might be that you have to set a low standard where people, try and get an Islamic bank account, for example. They pay a fair wage. They're transparent in their business dealings. There's a lot of guidance around how we should transact. Fiqh mu'amalat, how man transact. Mankind transacts with mankind. So there's a whole host of things that it's just to do with Islamic business, right? That we can just set what I call a relatively low bar, but it gives people confidence that their intentions are right and they're doing some of the right things. And then you take the people on a journey where you raise the bar for the reaccreditation. So like then
bronze, silver, gold,
because
platinum.
Either that or you just even raise the minimum bar, right? We can. And I think that would be good. I think there's a lot of communication buy-in that's needed, both from consumers, who's got the credibility to issue that standard, that stamp, and from businesses, why should they do it? And again, there's a lot of education and heart-winning required. But do I agree conceptually with what you're saying? Absolutely. I think that would help.
Is it a utopia?
It's not a utopia. I think you just got to start at the beginning. First, you've got to get everybody to accept that virtual circularity argument that we just talked about. If you accept that it's beneficial for the Muslim pound to do good, and let's define what is good under even a high-level Sharia framework. And people buy into the benefits. So you do a benefit case. Look, this is what it does. The circularity is that actually we create wealth in not just a halal way, in a righteous way, which actually benefits you. It's imbued with barakah. It means your dua is accepted. It's doing good in this life and the next. You're just kind of going full circle. And then once you bought into that concept, then everything else follows, right? You can't do it the other way. It's my experience. You can't just issue a framework without the winning the hearts behind the framework. It just has to be that way. You have to buy into the concept.
I see it two ways. One is there's a lot of buy-in already, especially because of what's happening in Palestine, and people are saying, look, this is where my money is actually going. Maybe I should redirect them funds rather than go in Tesco. Let me go to the normal grocery shop. As simple as that. The other is there's been a lot of bad investment decisions in our Muslim community, which has led to a breach of trust or lack of trust. And that's obviously affected. So people, and I did some research on this recently as well, very brief or small research, and people are saying the one reason we don't shop at Muslim businesses is just because I don't trust the quality of the level of service, or I just don't trust it. And so for me, I've seen two sides where people are like, yes, this is 100% a concept we should get behind. And one is, well, there's a lack of trust. So how do we kind of balance that?
So it's good that people are getting motivated, even if the cause of the motivation is quite severe. It would be nice to think that it would happen anyway, but whatever the trigger of that deep reflection is, It's there. But I think you've hit the nail on the head with trust. I think we mentioned earlier, I was in Canada and we spoke to actually incredibly skilled coach. And he was talking about how, I don't know, management and boards operate and all this sort of stuff, right? And from an Islamic context, everything boiled down to trust. And what we talked about there was that trust has two dimensions: character and competence. So first of all, you want to be able to assure yourself that the character of the people that you're dealing with, or the organization you're dealing with, the businessman you're dealing with, is correct, that they have integrity, that they're transparent, that the niyyah is good, right? So there's that element of due diligence around the organization. And like you say, Muslims can be their worst enemy, right? Sometimes, they don't live up to the high ideals of Islam. And then the second thing is, what do we mean by competence in this scenario? Is, credentials and track record. So the credentials are: have you done it before? Are you skilled at what you do? Can you provide the quality? And then the track record is actually you go and do it. So all of these things then enhance trust between the people who are motivated to help and then supporting Muslim businesses in the ecosystem. So I think we've got to imbue those characteristics in the companies that meet the kite mark that you're talking about, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about our younger generation. I know we have mentioned them quite a bit. But how do we change a younger generation to, rather than just being earners and consumers, for them to being builders? We were just literally speaking during a quick break about the high tech that offer the product that you're leading has created and wants to keep creating that. And generally the younger generation are the ones who are super quick with tech and they start scrolling phones when they're 2 years old anyway. How can we motivate them to be the builders of the future, and not just from a business perspective, but from a whole societal perspective? So from education, parenting, from our masjids, etc.
So let's talk about some of the challenges they face as well, right? I mean, we have to be cognizant of that. I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for what they go through. Their pressures are different. It's the social media generation. Everything seems to be amplified on this big broadcast platform. And that's one thing. There's this kind of mental pressure maybe that we didn't have. We had, maybe more physical pressures, but they had mental pressures. The second thing is, with the advent of AI, opportunities have become restricted in some respects, right? There's probably I'm seeing more graduate unemployment than I think previously, that we've seen previously. So a university degree isn't necessarily giving you the springboard to what you could have had historically, a safe job. And what that means is that actually there's an environment of uncertainty that this generation is born into. And actually, if you go back to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and historically, this concept of a job for life, being an employee, that didn't exist. You had much more tawakkul in what's going to happen and how your rizq was going to be delivered. There was much more uncertainty. So people had this confidence to step into the unknown, take more risks. And that's what this generation faces. The old certainties are not necessarily the same. And so coming from that environment, that there has to be a mental resilience that needs to be developed. And so I always, before answering your question at this foundational building block level, those who are mentally strong are likely to succeed. So the prerequisite is to build strong character in that generation, to build mental resilience. And then everything else that we've just talked about, and we will talk about, like the building blocks around business at one level, but civil society, building platforms for society, that comes from character first, right? So that's the first thing I would say. And we've got to really give some deep thought to that. How do we build strong, mentally resilient youth? Layered with spirituality as well, of course. How do we maintain the spirituality? Because these are the people who will be running our masajid, right? Yeah, these are the people who will be progressing into the charities. These are the people who will be becoming politicians, right? So our job is to equip them with skills and then let them go out and solve the problems. We can't solve the problems. We have to build a capability in people to solve the problems. And so we could obviously talk about every single building block, and that would be a huge discourse. But I think we've got to do that. And then you can say, right, how do I encourage them to take part in society? So I remember David Cameron, right, getting pilloried for talking about this big society concept. But actually it was because David Cameron said it and everybody sneered at him. But the reality is, what did he mean? He meant that everybody in society should accept accountability for the place that they live. And sadly for me, when I go to high-density Muslim areas, not just as a cliche, it's not true in every respect, but they tend to be lower income, more run down, more littered. Yeah. Just less pleasant at one level. They have some strengths. There's a masjid on every corner and all the rest of it. And why is it that your boundaries stop at your door and don't extend to your street, to your neighbors? That if I see rubbish strewn there, that I pick it up. It's just somebody else's problem. I grew up in a city Birmingham, in a white working class area. There were Muslims, there were others, but it was mainly white working class, what is now majority Muslim. And the terraced houses were immaculate. Yeah, the people would be looking after each other. If I had a problem, my dad wasn't around, I don't know, Terry 2 doors down would help me. And, there's this concept that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast of a neighborhood. It's really important because that will help that mental resilience that I'm talking about. This is not a segue. How our children grow up, internal to the house, not having interaction with their neighbors, not interacting with society widely, just on this kind of computer-based interaction. It's not going to do that. So parents have to, parenting skills is going to be key. So that's the foundational stuff. And then I think, like you say, I think the practical stuff, without going into every single sector, the practical stuff is that my generation have to proactively mentor the next generation, bring them into the masjid committees, bring them into the charity committees, or advisors now, not when it's too late and it just happens organically, and then, they may not have that character building in the meantime.
There's one masjid near me and they have a youth center. And I think within that youth center, they have a youth committee. And then they let the youth run it in terms of you guys run the workshops. And within that, they have boxing, they have gardening, and they have all sorts of different things, which I thought was a really good idea. Because if you give them a playground, essentially, to say, look, your youth committee member run this, when in 10 years' time, they'll know how to run a masjid and they'll have made their mistakes.
I love that concept, right? Because the younger you get accountability, and you develop your leadership skills, they last you a lifetime. I fall back on what I learned 25 years ago, even today. Yes, it's informed by experience and a bit of wisdom, but believe me, the experiences I had 25 years ago or 30 years ago, they still inform what I do today.
You were mentioning neighbours. And at the beginning of the episode, you were talking about how Dr. Suhail was saying the city is part of your neighborhood, essentially. One thing, recently I was speaking to a local imam and I was just asking him, because in Ramadan I had some zakat to give, and I said, anywhere local? He goes, I have a full spreadsheet of people within just the borough Newham of where to give zakat. Because you tell me, do you want a male, do you want a female, do you want a female with a family, a single female, do you want a male, a single male with a single parent, whatever you need, I have it here. And then it gets me thinking that we give so much charity to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Palestine, Turkey, wherever we give the charity, but on our doorstep, we have so many people who need just the day-to-day funds. And you know and I know that living in London, you need $3,500 a month to just survive. And these people don't have it for whatever reason. You are one of the key members, and you've been pivotal in NZF. So what role has that played, and what have you seen in the difference in the behavior of people giving charity to now start giving locally as opposed to just constantly giving abroad?
So National Zakat Foundation was formed as a single-purpose charity. So, I've been there 12, 13 years, one of the initial trustees. I'm chair today and work closely with Sheikh Suhail to kind of, constitute the institution of zakat within the UK with a domestic focus first. Basically, the concept is that we support local need first before we send it abroad. So that's the concept where, there's very strong hadith that support that. At the same time, we have to recognize that people will be moved by relatives abroad, certainly the older generations, and for the younger generations, they will see the crisis around the world and will be moved to support that. So it's not hard and fast that people will just follow a philosophy or, in our case, an opinion 100%. So we recognize that. But I think one of NZF's achievements over the last 12 years has been that they've moved the dial around accepting that there is a need locally. Before that, it was always just a presupposition that it'll go abroad because there's poorer people abroad, and that there were people suffering below our very noses, as it were, and we weren't helping them, right? And so that kind of very much started in that way, and we were helping initially underprivileged is the wrong word, sisters in real trouble actually, and that's how it kind of started, and it's kind of grown in terms of its mission. It's not just providing services to zakat givers like calculators and then being an agent for distribution. It's just far more encompassing than that. Zakat is an institution as a third pillar of Islam, hand in hand with Salah. It's more than just poverty alleviation. It's about building our own welfare system. That Islam itself gives a safety net, and that we're connected to each other. That we don't know, one day we may be in need of that safety net, and we have confidence in each other that our own deen and our own community and our own ummah will be there, right? So it has huge ramifications for confidence and the mentality and the connectivity of the ummah, right? So if we think about it as a welfare system, our view at NZF is that it doesn't all have to go through NZF. It's not a charity where we measure, I've got to have 50 million come through us, and it's how much we raise and how much we gave. It's not about that. It's actually building a zakat system. And one of our most successful initiatives, and you mentioned Newham, we have an initiative called the Community Zakat Program. And we work with Masjid in all the big cities and community centers. And just like you said, with the imam who has his spreadsheets, if we're talking about localization of zakah, who knows best who is needed in a dignified way, right? Because people don't want to, they're praying next to you and they may have a need and they may have confided in the masjid, but we're preserving their dignity. So you talked about Newham. We worked with Barking Masjid, and they were one of the first masjids that came on board on the community zakat program. And mashallah, it's a very successful program where we have given them our system of assessment. Are they below the nisab? It's got a back end to our database, so it has the kind of data points to help the masjid making sure that they're appropriately allocating zakat. And then we provide either zakat funds to the masjid for them to distribute, or they can access our system and we distribute the cash to the recipient. And by the way, NZF is one of the largest British charities to do cash grants, Muslim or non-Muslim. Okay, so this and there's a lot of studies on this. What's the effect and the impact of a cash grant versus other forms of charity? Because they tend to be driven by some other form like housing or whatever, right? So that CZP approach means that imam then he there's two things, the two benefits of this. He's got NZF's funds to start helping these people. Secondly, because he's got a system in place, he can then raise with the congregation and start generating zakah from people like yourself in that example that you gave. So he doesn't have to go through NZF, but we've given him a system to deliver it. And mashallah, now I think we're in about 25 masjids. We're doing a deep dive into Birmingham for a year, and we're going to be expanding all over the country. We're like with the Leicester Zakat Foundation. We're working with them. Birmingham prominent mosques like Green Lane Mosque. We're working with Al Manar, for example, in London. We started with Manchester Central Masjid. I think Didsbury or Cheadle, one of the masjids there as well. So it's like Bradford Community Foundation. So mashallah, I think we've hit upon something. I really think that this is going to be a really big way to kind of embed zakah through the masjid. Remember, zakah and salah is mentioned together so many times. And actually, we never thought about it this way, that the institution of salah and the masjid should work hand in hand with the institution of zakah, which would have been the Bayt al-Mal in the past, but in our Muslim minority countries. It should also be the forum for zakah. And then what you can do is then layer on other services, because for me, the mission is, how does a zakat recipient become a zakat payer? How do we take that person on a journey through the life cycle? It's not just what we call a plaster, sticking plaster, just to help them for a month. How do we bring that person right through from homelessness to food and basics to shelter to empowerment, i.e. train that person to earn the money, teach a person to fish?
Would it be better, or do you think it's better to have a side-by-side, to have like a Waqf or endowment system where you're not just relying on zakat donations, you're just generating the income from either properties or other investments to then give to these people who are in need?
Yeah, so just two things. There's a mismatch of demand and supply, right? The supply of zakat in this country is outweighed by the demand, right? So just give you an example. NZF helps about 2,000 people in the UK every month, but there's about 12,000 applications for zakah. So there's a need, first of all, to highlight that more zakat should come to local causes, right? I think we've got to make sure that happens. And there's plenty of zakat. Like you said, a lot of it goes abroad. If you look historically, zakah worked hand in hand with Waqf. One didn't replace the other. And financial sustainability is really important. So even for NZF, we have costs that we bear. For example, the infrastructure of zakah. I have to get that through my gift aid, or I have to ask for sadaqah. But we need to really have a Waqf to support like the overheads. And similarly, I was involved in a Mercy Mission project called Waqfinity, where the idea was to bring Waqf home to the individual. If you talk to the average Muslim, what is Waqf? I mean, we could do a survey at it, right? They're gonna, first they may not understand it, but even if they understand it, the masjid's got something like a waqf for, it's like some old buildings.
First time I heard waqf was when you see in the Quran and it just says waqf.
Yeah,
that's it.
That's it. The Quran waqf. Yeah. The printing of Quran, and so if there's anything that we did achieve a waqfinity, and we bought a couple of buildings and a waqf was formed. And inshallah, we'll bring it back. Was the concept of this? How do we take waqf and make it personal to you? So, Zaid, you could have a waqf. You don't have to be Bill Gates to have a foundation. Why don't you have a waqf? And we use digital, the digital landscape, whether that's blockchain or through just fractionalization, where you don't have to set up deeds, trusts, foundations, charities. That you can have a waqf, that you can see the benefits of that waqf with full transparency. So you put in £1,000. What does a waqf do? It invests it in the background. It's very much like what I do in business. It invests it. And then there's a return, right? So say you bought property and there was a 10% yield. You don't see that 10% yield coming into your account, your waqf account. And then you don't see necessarily that 10% was then allocated to elderly care or drug abuse problems or something you selected that you wanted your waqf to do. So if you look historically, right, we obviously know about, Hazrat Uthman's waqf, right? But, waqf were very advanced in the Ottoman Empire. There was a waqf that looked after cats. I think there is to this day in Istanbul. There was a waqf where a waiter in a restaurant accidentally broke a plate, which he would have to come out of his salary. There was a waqf that paid for that. Right? Obviously, hospitals and musafir khanas, travelers' inns, they were waqfs. And so I think it's very much time to revive the waqf. I think, some of the issues that we talked about earlier about longevity and time frame is a big obstacle. You're talking to a guy who's tried to sell waqf in a positive sense. When I say encourage people to donate to waqf. It is so hard.
Because it goes back to the first thing you said about immediate gratification.
Immediacy, right? They'll say, you're saying, Sultan, I put £1,000 in and only £50 is going to go to the cause. But it's potentially £50, brother, forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, or perpetuity to the extent that waqf survives. But the £1,000 could help somebody now. So then I have to kind of change the argument with that brother or sister and saying, let's look at your giving as like a wallet. How much is zakat? It's obligatory. It has to be distributed within 11 and a half calendar months or 12 Islamic months. There's your sadaqah. There's sadaqah jariyah that's going to benefit you after your death. And within sadaqah jariyah, there could be waqf. Are you not thinking about perpetuity? So after you go, it will help you, right? That's the benefit of waqf. What proportion of your giving, and Muslims are, I think, again, 3 or 4 times more likely to give, but what proportion of your giving should go to long term? So we've got to break this mental barrier. Even let's start small, even if it's 10%, put 10% long term. Again, people go immediacy, what's in them, this campaign, this conflict. We really got to think a bit strategically, right? Strategic giving, strategic thinking really needs to improve. If I'm doing a self-assessment scorecard on Muslims in our community, it's low.
Would you say that's the top priority for us to improve, to give us that financial dependence that we need, strategic thinking?
No, absolutely. Because let's put it this way. So, I don't know, COVID happened, right? Which community group was affected the most?
South Asians,
but particularly Muslims. Muslims had more deaths. Now, just imagine there was a multi-billion-pound waqf. Let's call it the Muslim Civil Society waqf in play. And it did a couple of things. It could react to calamities, unpredicted calamities. So the COVID, I think, was called the 1 in 100-year event or whatever. The statisticians will say that, right, or whatever. So could it have done something? Very quickly responded with this amount of wealth generated from investments and endowments. to do something? Could it have helped reduce the impact on our community through education, through support, whatever it is, I don't know, handing out vitamin D, whatever it is, right? And then proactively, right? If you sit here today and you now map out the social problems that we will face as a UK ummah, like let's take elderly care. That's a ticking time bomb. It's not like the old days of this extended family support network. There'll be, I don't know, dad, widower, in Dewsbury, son works in London in the city. Person's going to have to go into a home, maybe, or domiciliary care. But let's say if it's a home, is it faith-based, right? These things are a ticking time bomb, right? And so again, a strategic waqf could say, look, I can see this time bomb. I'm going to now invest in social enterprise, i.e. entrepreneurs who are going to fix this. It serves a social need and they'll make something for it, right? They'll make some profit. Let's start faith-based care homes. Yeah. So we can do it through private sector, or it could work, with government and saying, government help us, because ultimately he's going to save a taxpayer money, what we're doing. So there's this strategic thinking. I think when you're talking about waqf is essential for that, right?
Yeah.
We've got to build these institutions that can proactively handle the problems we face. I've often said this, but if you look at the drop-off, if you go to take Ireland, right? Ireland, when I grew up, lots of Catholic church. We know that Catholics were very practicing in Ireland, but they've seen a massive drop-off within one generation in attendance at church. So we can sit here very complacent. Oh, mashallah, Jummah, we got 4 Jamaats. It's all full. You can't get any space. But just look what happened in one generation. Are we sitting here complacently thinking, oh, it's just going to continue endlessly if we don't work on the youth, turn the masjid into what it should be, a hub of a community, right? Are we sitting here complacently thinking that? Because what could happen in a generation could be calamitous if we don't take action. And that's a big burden on our generation. We have to be thinking strategically and long term, right? Because you can't be complacent just because you think the masjids are full today, that they'll be full tomorrow.
100%. Just one final question before we finish. If we look at the Jewish pound, they've built really good tech. They've built Hollywood. They've built media. If the Muslim pound has that high level strategic thinking and galvanizes and mobilizes and everyone comes together, what can us as Muslims build?
Well, I think the sky's the limit, as they say, right? I mean, let's look at that in 3 components. So I think we talked a lot today about how we can build wealth. I think there's a big opportunity there. There isn't that many obstacles. I think if we can, especially if we support each other, let's build wealth. So that's, if you like, money. That's resource that will just automatically given the Muslim propensity to spend on social, right? On the S of ESG, on social, that will help. 2 then is a bigger challenge right now is media and the perception of Muslims, right? So this is where your strategic outlook comes in, right? We have to recognize that some of our donations, we talked about time frame from zakah, short time frame, sadaqah, sadaqah jariyah to waqf, but it's more than time frame now. Now we have to look at the segments of our spending, and it's, it doesn't seem as important to, fight Islamophobia, for example, as it is to support a crisis in Africa. But actually, just as much as zakat, local zakat is important, the position of the Muslims and winning of the hearts, which is a zakat category, in the classical tradition in the Quran, that is really important. Again, that strategic thinking will help us do that. And actually, whilst people feel a bit despondent about it, the guys control all the big social media platforms and whatever. But more than ever, because of the digitalization of media, there is an opportunity, right? There's an opportunity to break through barriers to entry that there wasn't there before. And then finally, in terms of politics, right? And engagement with the law and the governance of society we're in. We've seen increasingly more Muslims entering parliament, which is good, entering politics. But I think we've got to be working in all parties, right? I think what some people think is that Islam's making you, socialist by definition, as opposed to, working with business-minded groups. We've got to understand that actually Muslims should be operating across the political spectrum.
Should be balanced.
And working from within to, look, not in this. I think the problem we are, we can't win if we do, and we can't win if we don't. So if you don't, you're isolationist. And if you do, it's entryism, right? So we've got to actually just be managing that, saying, look, actually, no, I believe with your economic philosophy. Let's just take a center-right perspective. We believe in lower taxes, less debt, a balanced budget, for example. Yeah, but I don't believe in your approach to the Middle East. But we have a lot in common on these aspects. So we could be in those parties and saying, okay, whilst we disagree on your approach to the Middle East, here's our arguments why we should be, because foreign direct investment could come in from Saudi if we took a different position, which would benefit Brits here. So I'm just using that as an example. Yeah. So politics and supporting politicians with the right values again, and understanding that they make a lot of. I think people give politicians a hard rap. It's a very, very difficult job, particularly Muslim politicians, because they have to make certain compromises, perceptional compromises. But we have to accept that it's better that they're in a position to influence the debate. So when you take those three areas, we talked a lot about the making of wealth, but how we can strategically think about positioning of Muslims and the narrative and the communication, the media, and how we can also engage in politics properly, which I think we're trying to, but we need to do more. I think when you put those three together, I think when you talked about what can we learn from the Jewish pound, I think the Muslim pound could also get stronger through those three kind of dimensions.
100%. Sultan, I've picked your brains enough, I think, and I also think you have another meeting after this.
Always a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure, but I'm sure we'll be in touch as well.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.